بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا مرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين أما بعد. My dear brothers, please come forward and complete the lines. Don't lean against the wall unless you have a physical disability. The khutbah is part of the salah, and so you won't leave gaps in one as you would not leave gaps in the other. We thank Allah who has gathered and guided us here up to the moment of developing the deepest wisdom that is available to any man. And that is the wisdom to put our forehead on the ground in sajda or submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. We bear witness and testify that there is no one worthy of our worship, our praise, our devotion except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that we express these words in English and we express these words in Arabic when we say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. I bear witness and testify that 1400 years ago a man, a human being named Muhammad ibn Abdullah, came to this earth as the last and final messenger of God. There is none to follow after him. The book that he was presented in revelatory form, the Holy Quran, is free of any deviation, any distortion, any departure from the truth. Ameen. In the previous khutbah, we discussed the concept of the fact that there is in fact something of a war going on. There's a physical war going on in different parts of the Muslim world, and we know all about that, and we know that all too well. But the much longer term war that is going on is happening without physical violence, although eventually it does produce physical violence, and that is a war of ideas. There are many different factions within this war of ideas, but the two dominant strains are one which would suggest that the individuality of man is nothing other than an illusion. We call these the ideas of the West. I say illusion because, in theory, when we live in the West, we believe that all of us are individual people, that we all have rights, that these rights are guaranteed by constitutions and institutions that are very important, and that all of us, therefore, that this is the way to live. This is the theory of life in the Western world. The reality of life in the Western world is that a man can eat any kind of ice cream that he wants, but the system is set up so that there are really only two companies that provide it. A man can have any political thinking that he wants, but when it comes time to express that thinking, there are generally only two parties that he can choose from. A man can invest his money in any way that he wants, but only banks are given special advantages, and there are, in this country anyway, probably 4 of them that have rights that no other banks do. So on one hand, we have the theory of life in the Western world, which sounds nice and sounds decent and fair and reasonable. And on the other hand, we have the reality of that life, in which an elaborate series of events has occurred and continues to occur to restrict individual humanity, to restrict individual choice, and to convince people, most dangerously of all, that their life has no special meaning or purpose. The greatest intellectual crime the West has committed against itself, particularly because ordinary people here who we love and care for and respect as our brothers and sisters in humanity, ordinary people in the West suffer more from the West than you might ever imagine. But the greatest intellectual crime that has been committed by the Western way of thinking is the idea that you don't count, that you don't matter, that ultimately your life is much closer to an animal than an angel. That essentially most of the things that you want and need and deserve are things that all other people want and need and deserve, and you are essentially, at the end of the day, explainable to the world as a commodity. You need to eat, you need to sleep, you need various animal impulses satisfied, you need money to satisfy those things. And the better that you are able to satisfy your most basic animalistic desires, the more quote-unquote successful you are. In reducing man to a commodity, or even worse, an animal, the entire purpose of this life on earth has been lost. And we see the consequences of this when we look at the utter inability of people to solve simple problems with many times more resources than they need. For if men are reduced to nothing other than commodities or animals, there is no reason for the strong to protect the weak, for the young to take care of the old, for the old to advise the young, and the entire fabric of what has made us successful as people is gone. So it is that Africa has 40 times the food capacity that it needs, and people are starving. So it is that across the street we have hundreds of billions of dollars available, and in the buildings where that money is available, just outside, people sleep on sewer grates. So it is that everybody is entitled to a house, provided they pay 4 times more for it than it actually costs, because we're going to take advantage of those people when those who have money exploit those who don't. So it is that everyone is entitled to an education, provided they go into debt the next 30 years in order to obtain it. And so throughout this we see the nature of the hypocrite as defined in the Holy Quran. The difference between what is said and what is done. What is promised and what is real. The Muslim way of life stands in opposition to this. Opposition doesn't necessarily mean that we turn around and bomb people or cut their heads off or kill them. No, the greatest form of opposition to a negative way of life is to present a coherent alternative. Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam lived among a group of people who were lost as the people who surround us today, not just in this country, but in our own so-called back home. For if we think that life in this country is lost, the people in our own countries who wish to be like these people are far, far, far worse than they are. At least in this country, there is some attempt to respect the rule of law. At least in this country, there is some attempt to respect the property rights of these people. At least in this country, the government in general tries to make an excuse if they come into your home and take you away in the middle of the night. These things are vast improvements from what we see in our own countries. But let me return to this war of ideas, because it is the central, most important, most overriding task of your life, to provide an alternative to this among people who have not been provided with an alternative. The alternative to this way of life is the idea that every person is unique and special and created by God with a divinely ordained purpose. That every person has the ability to contribute something to the life of this world that no other person may individually know, and that only God understands for sure. There are many words for this in Arabic that shade at this idea. Some of them are the notion of qadr or destiny. Some of the notion of rizq or what has been provided to you. Some of the notion of amana or trust that happens to you in life. But they all point towards the most beautiful story ever told to any person. And that is that you matter. You count. You were created for a reason and you have a purpose. And therefore, you are special. You can take a man and you can put him in prison, you can beat him, you can starve him, but the worst thing you can ever do to a person is convince them that there is no point to their life. If you convince somebody that there is no point to their life, you can give them millions of dollars and they still kill themselves, as you see many celebrities and athletes and other famous people do. Or they take drugs to destroy the feelings that they have in their brain. Or they take alcohol, or they take anything to obscure themselves from the connection they have and the senses they've been blessed with. It is no accident that when Western society is at the highest level of its prosperity, or was over the last 10 years in its history, that its rates of suicide are 10 to 15 times higher than even the poorest Muslim country. Even the most backward, corrupt, confused, and disappointing Muslim leaders are able to ensure, not really because of themselves, but because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that their citizens don't kill themselves. Even that's maybe the only thing that we ever have gotten right, but it is at least one thing. You can go to the poorest part of Baku in Azerbaijan, or the poorest village in Pakistan, or a place just west of Timbuktu in Mali, where people maybe don't even know where the next drink of water is going to come from, but they sense that they have a reason to be alive. And yet you can go to the halls of the richest and most successful parts of this country, or the United States, or Britain, and you will see people who are so unhappy that the very act of living and being awake is too much for them. This is evidence of the fact that success for man is not to live as an animal. That man needs something more. He needs a purpose. The war of ideas that is occurring between us and Western society is in fact stated on the wrong terms. They would like people to believe that we are against individual freedom or individual rights or the dignity of women and all of these other things, charges that are leveled against us. And in reality, nothing is more nonsensical than that idea. For if I say to you that God made you, that God has endowed you with a special purpose, who am I to take your life? Who am I to order you to do something? Who am I to reduce you to something which God himself has not? And so it is that, properly understood, the ideas of Islam set men free. The ideas of Islam give men a reason not only to be alive, but to be good. And in being good, and in wanting to be better, and in racing towards God, towards the inevitable end to which we all must come, our life has purpose, meaning, dignity, quality, honor, and all of those other words that people say are so old-fashioned they don't need to be mentioned anymore. Our strong should not oppress our weak, because our weak are not only protected by themselves, they are protected by God. Our money is not really our own, it belongs to everybody around us. Our job is to do what we can to take care of ourselves and to take care of them. Our skills, our talents, the things that we've been offered, they belong to the world, not just to us. And our life is a journey to find out what magic God has put inside us to make us the best possible person that we can be. This is the story that you should tell your children before they go to bed at night. This is the story that your wives need to understand about the nature of your marriage. This is the story that separates man from lying in a gutter and always keeps his eyes on the stars. This is the message of Islam. This is the deen that we inherited. This is why one man who lived in a desert could talk to people who hated what he had to say, who threw garbage at him, who chewed the liver of his favorite uncle, and convert all of those people with the force of his character, because there is something in us that runs towards truth like a bee runs to honey, like a starving man runs to food, or a thirsty man to water. We are built not just with a need to eat and sleep. We are built deep inside us with a yearning for God, with a love for God, with a hunger to be close to God, with an understanding of God. Even the smallest babies tend to fall asleep looking up at the sky. Even plants grow towards where there is light. There is something in us that is oriented towards the one who made us. And this is what makes us so different, so much better, if we choose to be, than those who have no purpose. It's not that we were created better, for all of us were given this. It's that we have chosen to accept a way of life that elevates us from being a barbarian to being a man. This is the conversation and speech that no Muslim leader ever has when he's interviewed on CNN. Because he's ashamed and he doesn't understand what he has. He thinks that Air Force planes or chemical weapons or the mud that's called oil that is underneath his ground, he thinks that this is what gives him power in this world. Rasul had none of those things. None of those things. And he had more power then and more power 1,400 years later than any of these fools and clowns who masquerade as leaders in our society. Ours is to defend the promise of a dream that cannot die, because it is planted in every human being the moment he takes breath. But our problem is that we have strayed away from this understanding, and we have bought into this Western delusion. And it is a delusion. On one hand, it promises people all kinds of nice, high-sounding words. But on the other hand, it fails totally in the delivery of those words. Because the people who run the system, the people who benefit from the system, have no fear of anything other than what they can get away with in this life. They don't feel that they are accountable to God. They feel they are accountable to institutions that they themselves designed. So it is that we can say we have a democracy, and everybody who agrees with that democracy, who has power, the first thing they do is seek to buy out every single mechanism, voting, media, rulings, judgments, technicalities. Every single rule is perverted in the sense of power at all costs. You can